to the podcast. This is not a film consisting of Ira, Anushka, Anya, Sneha, Arnav, and Siddhant. Today we'll discuss our thoughts on the Spanish Mexico co production 2007 film El Orfanato or The Orphanage. The film is a gothic supernatural horror and it marks the debut feature of J. Bayona, written by Sergio G. Sanchez and produced by Guillermo del Toro. I'll be starting us off with the main themes of the orphanage, which are motherhood and the loss of childhood, and how the intersection of these two aspects forms the primary horror of the film. The movie's events begin with the death of a child, Thomas, and the vengeful love of his mother, Benigna, and end with the death of another child, Simon, and the selfless love of his mother, Laura. As the movie references 1970s Spanish cinema, it can be presumed that the film is set in the same era. Due to the effects of Franco's dictatorship of Spain from 1939 to 1975, in which many children were separated from their families, particularly leftist working class families or single mothers, to create the traditional patriarchal Catholic family microcosm that supported Franco's regime, the child is a highly complex figure in Spanish cinema, with their victimization either at the hands of loved ones, ghosts, or by becoming ghosts often being explored. Although the movie is rife with ghosts, murder, and the supernatural, the genuine discomfort arises at the sight of ghostly children and the realization of their loss of innocence. The film also constantly references Peter Pan, from young Simone asking Laura outright if she would follow him if Peter Pan took him, to Thomas mirroring the infamous boy who never grew up. Laura herself parallels an old and weary Wendy who left Neverland with a metaphorical clock ticking. The movie ends with her subverting Wendy's role as a bystander to her daughter's abduction by Peter Pan, by Laura following Simone and presumably dying. With Simone mirroring Jane and the ghosts of the orphanage's children being analogous to the lost boys, there is a sense of the inevitable, a doomed from the beginning motive for all the orphans in the movie, and Laura's death is almost expected. Depending on how you interpreted the ending, the ghostly children could either be spooky but harmless children, malicious conniving tricksters, or a sorrowful reminder of their lost childhood. I opted for the third. The other central theme is motherhood, portrayed through the protagonist Laura, whose fate at the end of the film is to reprise her role as Wendy by playing mother to all the ghosts of the orphanage. In a sense, this parallel walks backwards. Wendy first became a mother figure to the lost boys, then left Neverland and saw her daughter be taken away, whereas Laura was a lost boy first, left Neverland second, saw her son be taken away third, and followed him to finally become a mother figure to the lost boys. Laura is the matriarch of a Spanish film in the 1970s, during which the second wave of feminism was underway. She is what we define as a modern woman, not limited by the values of blood being thicker than water, doesn't believe in the Christian God, at least not blindly, has a family and still pursues her dream. Laura tries her best to be a mother, and we see her successes and failures. She isn't infallible, she's human, and that's why to see her potent grief upon losing her son feels so visceral. Despite her hysteria, the orphanage feels grounded with the atmosphere of despair and the anticipation that defines the true horror of the movie. The scene where Laura frantically looks for Simone with two small interspersed follow shots inside the house, ripping off the masks of all the children at the party, and her subsequent run at the beach is one of the best scenes in the movie. Simone's fate is foreshadowed through an inanimate point of view shot inside the closet, where Laura opens it to drop objects on the floor and then shoves them back inside, locking the closet. The scene is full of cuts and zooms as an increasingly agitated background score backs Laura screaming to heighten the tension. The camera gets shakier as she runs the beach to add to the frenzy and seriousness, and it cuts between Laura and the massive waves batting the shore to wrap up the urgency and show the stakes. The following scene at the hospital with an injured and shell shocked Laura, a worried Carlos, and police psychologist Pilar is entirely diegetic, as opposed to the previous non diegetic scene, to provide a stark contrast and show the seriousness of the situation. These scenes of genuine grief and the pain of a mother is where Franto excels. Another example is the therapy session where Laura's quiet determination to find her son establishes her as a selfless mother. Her arc concludes with her sacrifice to reunite with Simon and mother the other ghosts. This act of martyrdom feeds into the larger perception of how motherhood is often portrayed as inherently giving, selfless, and self destructive to the mother. Laura even foreshadows that she is unable to live without Simone by saying that she wants to join him where he is. And yet, the movie depicts Laura's death as tragic and haunting, a sign of her inability to move on from her past and trauma rather than the perfect conclusion.
I think, along with motherhood, another broad stroke that we see throughout the movie is the idea of female hysteria and how that consistently plays into the idea of a haunted house and the idea of a family that is grieving or is dealing with loss. Um, in all honesty, I thought that the movie was not very refreshing to see. It included some problematic tropes that are very recurring and are patterns that we see in almost any horror movie that revolves around the idea of a haunted house or a family that is troubled or a woman who is not heard out. Of course, there's female hysteria for one, but the idea of a human being having to be disfigured, mutated, or othered from the general idea of a normal human being to instill horror or to establish the character as creature of horror is another trope that has evolved into a pattern which we see in El Orfanato as well. I think the movie consisted of all very standard things that a basic horror movie would present to you. The classic doors creaking, windows crashing down, etc. The camera work and background score also seem to follow a predetermined stencil almost, with numerous follow shots and POV shots, with mostly Laura's character in the frame. I did, however, appreciate the POV shots and the follow shots though, because they do end up coupled with the background score, which ascends over and over again. They do heighten the sense of tension that you feel when you're watching the scenes go by. Um, I did feel like a considerable chunk of the movie depended on the build up by the background score and zooms, which ended up being a little repetitive. I wouldn't say I disliked the movie, but it was one that did not seem to bring a lot of new aspects to the table.
This is Anya Thonawala, and I'm going to be talking about two major parts of the movie which I felt should be highlighted. The first part is about the father, and the second part is about the ambient light. There are many instances where the father is shown as less attached to the child, as proven in the first part, where he doesn't really go and help the child when he calls for help. The child also involuntarily calls for his mother in the first part. When the child gets lost, there is a sense of fear in the mother, but this is not entirely shown from the father. At many aspects in the movie, there are motherly instincts shown, but the father is more of a practical kind of person who thinks about the dangers of the wife taking certain actions than about actually saving the child. Most of the work is done by the mother, like when the mother tries to call a ghost caller, and the father is not really happy with the same, even though this could be a big clue to help find the child. On the whole, I felt there was less involvement from the father towards the end. He also leaves his wife alone in the house, knowing the dangers that she can be in. Moving on to the ambient light, there are many places, especially towards the starting, where the children are playing in the garden, where there are instances of ambient light. The movie has a dull mood, and this stays constant throughout the movie.
Disagree on your points. I actually like the movie. The film gives an energy of 1970s gothic setting, but it apparently doesn't tell the exact year it's set in. I also noticed the giant bungalow is situated far from the nearest town, isolated and secluded. It stands alone, surrounded by vast stretches of land, enhancing the eerie and gothic atmosphere. Its seclusion creates a sense of being trapped in time, reminiscent of the Victorian era. Within these walls, the residents find themselves encountering monsters and experiencing terrifying horrors, just as many characters in the Gothic tales often do. It has a promising premise and an engaging mystery, but according to me, it falls short in delivering the expected horror elements I expected. The film leans heavily towards the mystery aspect, leaving behind the necessary scares that horror enthusiasts like me actually seek. And also, like the atmospheric setting, like the dormitory was shown as a serene space with neatly arranged beds, walnut quilts, and soft sunlight filtering through dusty windows, was amusing to me. There were many suspenseful moments, like the one in the cave near the sea, was nice, but they lacked the true terror that could have elevated the movie's impact a lot. Instead of having a gripping horror experience, I found myself engaged in solving the mystery of finding Simone rather than feeling genuinely frightened. Also, the ending feels rushed and unsatisfying, don't you guys think? Like, leaving important questions unanswered. After investing in the characters and their journey, the lackluster conclusion feels like a letdown to me. Now, I would like to point out some of the cinematic shots I liked. One being the establishing shot, as the film begins with a wide angle aerial shot of the grand and imposing orphanage building. It actually sets the tone and establishes the location, showcasing the isolation and eeriness of the setting. Another being the slow zoom shots that are employed to emphasize emotions and reactions. In a pivotal scene, like a shot that focuses Laura's face as she expresses grief and desperation, that actually conveys the depth of her pain and determination. Apart from that, there were a lot of background music to support the horror mystery. And more on technicalities, I think Arnav would like to make a few points.
A shot that I found very important in the movie was near the 38-minute mark, where Laura just found a doll in Simone's bed, and then we see a shot of a door slowly closing, and then the clock is winded ahead 6 months. This is a bridging shot, I think, and it was meant to be used as a transitional device and show time jump. I think it also allows the reader to settle into the story, and it's also heightening the tension and the mystery surrounding Simone's disappearance. Also, there's a number of instances of foreshadowing in the movie. I think the opening scene itself is a good example of that. Laura is playing hot and cold with her childhood friends from the orphanage, which is a nod to the scene later in the movie when she has to play with the ghosts of those children to rescue her son Simone. Uh, some other example could be Simone and his paintings and his imaginary friends, which are all nods to the ghosts of the children, which we see later in the movie. There's a throwaway line by Simone when they're preparing to receive the kids from the orphanage. When Simone says that he will not go downstairs until she sees Tomas's house, and we see it's a nod to the part where we later find Simone in Tomas's house, or where Tomas was kept.
I was
The
damn
most
excited because I mean it's Juan Antonio Garcia, and this guy was also directing Jurassic World, the 2018 one if I'm not wrong. And there's this newer movie called The Society of the Snow. It's a Spanish movie, and this guy has written and directed the thing, and apparently it's pretty good because like it's had great hype till now. So when I heard about the movie, I was like, "Chalo, theek hai. It's actually gonna be something to look forward to." And I'll say that the directing style and the direction was pretty similar to Fallen Kingdom, and I did really enjoy it. Wanted to talk about the color palette a little bit. The color palette of the movie was greenish gray, and that lowish tinge. What that actually would do is create that sense of suffocation in the audience with that supernatural element in it. Most horror movies do follow this similar color palette, and it actually really works, and it's still not gotten old. And the movie also utilizes ambient sounds to establish that sense of unease and foreboding among the audience. That's what I really liked. The sounds of those creaking floorboards, like those distant whispers, gusts of wind, they all end up contributing to the same haunting atmosphere of the orphanage. Also, I wanted to say that the sound of silence has been very well used because this is a movie that does not have a lot of jump scares. So, building up that scare, building up that tension in the audience was very difficult, and that was done really well. The silent pauses were very effective because they would build tension and leave the audience on the edge of their seats. And throughout the movie, there's whispering voices in the background that are subtly incorporated into the sound design. That's something that I really liked. And these whispered dialogues, they would actually create that mysterious atmosphere, hinting at the presence that there is something beyond the real realm and beyond the realm that we live in. And when these whispers did end up overlapping with the ambient sounds, they would blur the line between reality and the supernatural realm, and that was really fun to watch. And me not being a very huge fan of horror movies personally, I actually did really end up watching this movie, and I did end up enjoying it.
This marks the end of our podcast. This is not a film. I hope you have enjoyed our discussion. Signing off once again, we are Ira, Anushka, Anya, Sneha, Arnav, and Siddhant. Thank you.